Hello, my name is Greg Massi, and this is episode number 69 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. And October is officially Radical Research Month here at The Color of Air. On the last episode, we had Jeff Wagner, and today we have Jeff's co-host from Radical Research, Hunter Ginn. And this was a super fun interview. I mean, talking with Jeff is always great too. And I knew from listening to Radical Research and the way that they interact with each other, I knew I was going to have a blast talking with Hunter, and sure enough, I did. But this podcast was a good excuse for me to kind of get to know Hunter a little bit more and talk about the different musical projects he's been involved in, such as Canvas Solaris, Plague Psalm, and now he's the new drummer for Sculptured. And stay tuned. We'll have Jason Walton from Aguilar, Sculptured, amongst many other projects, in the next couple weeks or so. I actually taped that interview before I taped Hunter's, but it just made sense to have Hunter's episode next, again, just to kind of make October all about Radical Research, because it is an amazing podcast, something that I enjoy listening to a lot, so I recommend it highly. Anyway, so yeah, it was great to talk to Hunter about his music, but then, we devolved into plenty of tangents about growing up in the 90s and being a metal fan, music fan in the 90s, and what that was like. And honestly, I think by the end of this podcast, it's pretty much the audio equivalent of that Simpsons meme of old man yells at cloud. I kind of feel Hunter and I get to that kind of point with this episode, but I loved every minute of it. It was a blast. And so I'm glad you came back this week to listen, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Hunter Ginn. But first, here's some music, and this is Canvas Solaris, Hunter's band, and this track is called Black Drop Effect, and it's from their most recent album, Chromosphere. my introduction to you was the Radical Research podcast with Jeff Wagner, and I was telling Jason Walton this earlier too, is that I was nervous about listening to that podcast, to your podcast, and part of it was that, and Jason's podcast too, and I think part of it was, since I was also sort of doing a music podcast when you guys started it, I was like, what if they're better at it than I am? And I get self-conscious about things like that. I don't know why, but I do. So it took me a while to actually listen to Radical Research, but now I'm fucking hooked. I love it so much.
Thank you.
I love it because it's just like, I think I told Jeff this too. It's like I'm listening to friends. Like I'm listening to friends debating music, and it's like, even if I disagree with them, it's all in good fun.
Nothing could make me happier than you're saying that, because ideally that's what Radical Research would be. Is just two guys who are really, really good friends talking about music. And I wanted to push Jeff in a different direction. And Jeff had book fatigue at the time and said, hey, why don't we do a podcast? And at the time, I mean, this was 2015, I had like a very, very thin idea of what a podcast even was.
Yeah.
And he said, look, we will basically reroute the conversations that we have about music into a show, and we'll record it. And early on, there was a lot of self-consciousness involved in that, but as time's gone on, I think that it has picked up the rhythm of just two guys who love each other talking about music. And at its best, I feel like that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes across, it's just a real positive vibe to it,
and there's a it's a yay say enterprise. Like we talk about music that we love. We're not in it to criticize anything. If we don't like something, we just don't talk about it. Like we're here to promote things that we love mutually. Like and we've had criticism that we don't disagree often enough and that sort of thing. And I understand that, and that's fine, but someone else can do that. Like we would just rather, sort of give promotion to things that we think are worthy of that.
Oh yeah.
So it's a world full of negative press, and like I know that doesn't sound very metal. But I mean, we love music, and we want to share the music that we love with other people that might not know it. I mean, that's I think it's a really generous thing. I've felt, like that's been a gift in my life when people have shared music with me that I haven't known. I mean, and that's what we want to do with other people.
Yeah. I mean, I find that I just like, I'll listen to an episode, and like there'll be, I'll learn something, or like there are bands you go over obviously that I've never listened to, and I'll just point out, for example, like ICS Vortex. Like I was like, I've heard the name, obviously. I've been around the metal scene for 30 years. Sure. I know the name, but like I've never listened to any of his stuff, or at least I didn't know his identity within the stuff I probably have heard. And so hearing you guys discuss that and go in depth about that was just great. It was just like, I love learning about music, even if it's music I don't personally like. Like
Same.
I can, like
Same.
those like those album making of DVDs that were big for a while.
Dude, I've even told Jeff this. I will read a book about a band that I actively dislike just because I like reading about the process of people making music and the psychology involved and all that. Yeah, totally, man.
Exactly. That's so anyway. So yes. So I know you first and foremost from the podcast, but I'm glad you're here to talk, because I wanted to, kind of delve into what you do musically too,
Okay.
because I had never heard Canvas Solaris. I'll
Okay.
be honest with you, and so I've been trying to listen and get my ears wrapped around it, and I
Mhm.
really like what I hear so far.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Um, if just and just kind of like listening from like I forget what I listened to one of the earlier ones and then listened to Chromosphere,
Right.
and I can hear the evolution, like
Yeah. Yeah. There's a yeah.
so I just kind of wanted to just like, how did the most general basic music interviewer question, how'd you get started and how did that band come about?
So it's funny that you asked this question because Nathan and I were actually together this weekend working on some new Canvas Solaris music.
Oh,
And so
I saw
yeah,
that.
yeah. And so Nate and I are, well, we're the kind of the founding members. And we, for the first 2.5 years of our existence, we're a death metal band. And at a certain point, we decided that we wanted to do other things. And I mean, we both love death metal, but like the ratio of our music that was appropriate to death vocals or to vocals of any kind just was kind of skewed. And so we decided to go instrumental. And so we did that in, I guess, 2002. And Ben Simpkins was our bassist and rhythm guitarist for a few years. And then he went to graduate school in Ohio and he left. And so we got Chris and Gail and Donnie and did a few records with them on we recorded the first album on Tribunal Records, and then we worked with Ken Golden on Sensory
Okay, cool.
for 4 records. And then when we got then so there was a, gosh, let me think here, like a like 7 or 8 year gap between our last record and when we started recording Chromosphere.
Hmm.
And when we started recording Chromosphere, Matt Rosensky from Tribunal had started up Dive Bomb. And he had re-released all these albums that we love by like Death Row and Watchtower and Confessor. And so I reached back out to Matt and was like, hey, man, any interest in working with us again? He said, yeah. And so we did that. And yeah, so that's in a nutshell Canvas Solaris. But like, so in terms of how we got started, though, I do enjoy telling the story. So
Okay.
Nathan was in this band called Publicon. Don't ask.
Okay.
Even he can't answer. Yeah, I'd come home from school and they were a great band. They were an instrumental band too. They were like sort of Don Caballero meets Helmet sort of thing. And he and I were hanging out before the show and we were talking about music. And in that time, we discovered that we were both into Cynic, Carcass, and Skinny Puppy. And they were on the verge of kind of breaking up and they knew it too. And he said, hey, man, when this is all over, let's get together. And we did. And it was just like immediate. And I mean, he's my best friend for like 23 years. It's
Mhm.
just funny thing. So yeah, anyway, that is the story of Canvas Solaris.
That's
It's
awesome.
that it's the children's bedtime story of Canvas Solaris. My daughter, however, is not interested in that story at all. So
Okay.
yeah.
You gotta,
I've tried to tell her.
she's like, wait, but there's no,
Yeah.
there's no.
She's like, Daddy, we're like Peppa Pig hasn't even entered into this story.
Yeah, I know,
You know,
exactly.
so yeah.
Well, well, that's cool. And like, and it's, when I'm listening to it, I mean, my first thought, and don't take this as me saying you sound like this. It's just my first thought was like, oh, this is kind of sort of akin to dysrhythmia.
No, dude, no, that's a huge compliment to me.
Yeah.
We actually, like, Kevin is a good friend of mine. I don't talk to him nearly as often as I used to, or as much as I'd like to.
Hmm.
But I love the guy to death. He and I used to tape trade. We actually played some shows with Dysrhythmia.
That
Yeah,
doesn't
no,
surprise me in the least.
that's a total compliment to me, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of that same kind of vibe. How would you describe then, I mean, you kind of like listed out the bands that you kind of brought you guys together, but like,
Mhm.
so once you kind of said, okay, we're going to move in the instrumental direction, what was kind of did you have kind of like an impetus in your head, like, okay, this is a sound we're trying to achieve, or did you just,
Yeah. Originally, like, and this was kind of the thing to, I don't really felt, I never really felt like we got to the Canvas Solaris sound until our second record, which
okay,
was Penumbra Diffuse. But like originally, it was like Nathan and I went back to our 1993 roots, which is like Loud Blast and Oblivion, Psychotic Waltz, Cynic, Atheist, like all that stuff. And that, I mean, that's like our favorite music. And like Voivod, Watchtower, all that stuff. And that's kind of where we were. Oh, Death. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Death. Um, and then, but there was all this other stuff that we wanted to do. We just didn't quite know how to do it, or we didn't have the resources to do it yet.
hmm
And it took a couple of years to kind of work through that, until we could get to where we kind of wanted to be.
okay.
But yeah, that like, those were, yeah, Mekong Delta. I mean, I could go on and on. Like that was all the shit. Like, I mean, that's where we were. Coroner. Yeah, we did for a couple of years. We just went back to that and such, where we stayed. And then it got to the point where we were like, okay, well, the Dead Can Dance influences can come in, and
Oh, cool.
Universe Zero, and
Yeah.
all these other things that we love can start to filter in, because we have a better sense of like how to bring those things in now.
Oh, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
and I will say, like, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to come off sounding jaded and cynical, because as I get older, I realize
That's my dude, that's my resting state. No worries.
But so I've kind of come to the realization that, like, because when I was growing up, like, I kind of came of age, I suppose, like late 80s, early 90s with music.
Mhm.
And so, I was like way into like metal guitar players and stuff like that, right as grunge kicked in, and I was like, I want to play guitar solos. And then everyone's like, no, we hate guitar solos. And I'm like, fuck. uh but but like, so it took me a while to and then like what I think I've mentioned this in a couple of other interviews too, is like I had been noticing that in the last like 10, 15 years, there's been more and more of these metal guitar metal bands where like you think of, and I'm not saying this because I'm a fan, but just like, you think of like Dragon Force, or
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
any,
yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah.
where guitar playing has kind of come
Guitar
back.
Hero kind of, yeah, 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 yeah.
And most of those guitar players bore the crap out of me. Like, it's
Sure.
just like, I don't, so it's very rare for me to find a band where the guitar player like really jumps out at me. And you guys are one of those bands. I feel like Nate just like like it was one of these things where I was actively like, as soon as I was listening to it, I'm like looking him up. I'm like, what else has he done? Because like his guitar playing just immediately jumped out at me, especially on
He's,
Chromosphere, where it's just like,
dude, the guy's amazing. He dude, like, and yeah, he is like complete. He's completely self-taught. Knows no theory. He like has one of the most natural musical instincts of anyone I've ever met. He, like, Chris one time made a quip that you could give Nathan like a hockey ticket and two acorns, and he would have an album for you in 30 minutes. He's just like that kind of guy. And what's funny is that like on every other Canvas record, like there are guitar solos for sure, but like Chromosphere really evolved into Nathan's album. Like if there's one album that's Nathan's, like it Chromosphere became his vision. And it, like, there are a lot of guitar solos. And I'm also like pretty uneasy with assertive guitar solos. I love them. I mean, dude, King Diamond's like one of my favorite
Yeah.
bands. I mean, I love Thin Lizzy. I love great guitars, but like there's a point of diminishing returns normally. And there were times like when we were doing Chromosphere that I got sort of queasy with the amount of them. And then when I heard the final mix, I was like, you know what? All this is appropriate.
Yeah.
And dude, I am so grateful to hear you say that. And I'm going to pass that along to Nathan because he is a huge fan of yours and a huge fan of Maudlin and Kodot. And so he is going to be to the moon to hear that. So,
Okay.
dude, yeah, thank you so much for saying that, man.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah.
I really do think Nathan has such a charisma and a personality too that comes through beyond the technicality of it.
Yeah.
Because that, like you said, that Dragon Force kind of shit bores the hell out of me too, man.
It it does. I mean, and it's funny too. I think Jason said in his interview too. He was talking about. He brought up this idea about how sometimes people our age can get
How old are you?
44.
Okay, I'm 43. So no,
Okay,
we're all yeah, we're all in the same boat, the same jaded kind of boat. Yeah.
Yeah. We lived through the 90s. And
Yep.
but yeah, like but you can get like he had a really good phrase for it. It was like complacent with nostalgia. And I feel like and it was funny that he said that because as he said that, I'm looking over at the G.I. Joe action figure I just bought. Because I painted my guitar to look like it, and I was just like, okay, yeah, I know what you mean. uh but yeah, like, so I think like there's part of me that was like, oh, I'm glad that guitar prowess is something that's like very cool and very in again. But like I see like, yeah, like I know I don't know, like I don't want to get into a shit talking podcast. Because
No, but I know, but like it's all right, and I'm gonna just be you know what? This is your podcast. I can talk shit.
oh
So
yeah,
yeah.
I don't
But
care.
I mean it is a symptom of this YouTube generation that I mean, everyone can shred now. And like everyone, I mean, dude, I see drummers on YouTube that are 14, 15 years old. I couldn't keep up with them to save my life technically. But I worry about the state of the song, the state of art. It's like it's fine that you can shred, but at what point are you going to study the music to learn how to develop real ideas?
Yeah.
And that does worry me.
Wow, I've never thought about it. You've actually thought about it a little bit deeper than I have. I'm just kind of like kids.
But
Uh
I worry if there is a terminus to all the things that we've taken this time to develop that probably do other have like that have other potential vistas. But I wonder, are they ever going to be realized? Because we do, like as you say, we live in this culture of immediacy, and we want all these things right now. Like I don't know, it's like they're like we have more resources than ever, but there's less to show for it than ever.
yep. Yeah.
I mean, that kind of keeps me up at night.
It's yeah, and God, I've probably said this, use this example like 30,000 times the last couple of years on this podcast. But yeah, in my band, my guitar player is a lot younger than me. He's like 28 now, maybe 27 or 29. I don't know. But he is part of like and it's he knows way more than I ever knew about like 80s metal bands. I mean, like underground,
Yeah.
because like when I was growing up, and I'm sure when you were growing up, it's like we used to have to go to the store,
Magazines or stores.
magazines,
Yeah.
and if we go to the CD store, you've got tape store, if I should be more specific. Or actually, no. Or you could think of it the way I used to think of it. It's like I've got $20 in my pocket.
Dude, that's exactly. You don't even have to finish that. That's totally how I thought about it. I'll buy 2 tapes.
Yes,
Yeah.
2 tapes.
Yeah.
Or 1 CD and have change.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so yeah, you had to like kind of go up. Like I have a very distinctive memory of going into like Tower Records, or one of those record stores in Connecticut, and looking at when CDs were in long boxes. It's talking about nostalgia, but like, and I was staring at Manowar at the which album is it? Master? No, the one that has the big long epic about Achilles on it. Whatever.
Oh, God, that's the one after Hail to England, I think.
Or it's.
All right. Anyway, yeah.
Anyway, the point being,
Yeah.
And I just remember looking at it, being like, "Wow, these guys must sound awesome." And I didn't pick it up at the time, and then a friend of mine had it on cassette, and I listened to it. I was like, "Wow, that's not what I expected it to sound like." I mean, I am a Manowar fan of certain things.
Yeah, same, man. I in fact, I listened to Into Glory Ride today, but with you, at that point in my life, not my thing.
Yeah.
I had to come around. It had to take Bathory to get me into Manowar, I think. So
wow, that is
something like that.
Wow, that is a crazy way of getting into it. But yeah. but still, like, like, I mean, that's how we've, I still am not the hugest Atheist fan, but that's how Toby, who was in the band with, that's how he discovered Atheist. He was just like in a record store and was like, "Who's the hell is this?" And then becomes and so yeah, it's weird to me. This is a very convoluted way of me saying all this, but it's just weird to me that like now someone, because when I asked my guitar player, I'm like, "Well, how do you learn about this stuff?" He's like, "Oh, I just went to Metal Archives," and I said, "Oh, like I like this band." So you type in their name and it gives you 30 other bands that sound like them.
Yeah.
And then you just go and you listen to them. And I mean, and he's got a bigger vinyl collection than me. And like certain aspects of this new culture, I'm okay with. But yeah, it's just bizarre to me. And I feel like a relic sometimes where I'm just kind of like, I'm like, yeah.
I do too. And I feel like my cynicism is in some ways unfounded, because I'm sure that there were people in the 70s that would feel the same way about the way that I got into music.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can't hold it against anybody. No one is a criminal because of when they were born.
Right, exactly.
But like I feel like, I don't know, man. I feel like cynicism is a birthright. And like you get old and you like, the first thing I do every morning is moan. And like things hurt when they didn't used to. And it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of satisfying to be grumpy about things. But I do genuinely feel like there was something really rewarding about taking a risk on ordering something from Relapse or Metal Disc or Sound City 2000, wherever, and like essentially making that bet on what somebody that you trusted in a magazine said.
Mm-hmm.
And like believing in the magic that it could like be some kind of revelation. And sometimes it was. And that like, I'll tell you when it wasn't. And this is like one of my favorite albums now. When like there was so much hype about Dark Throne's Transylvanian Hunger, and it was so hard to get a hold of it. And I remember getting it, and I was like, "Oh, well, apparently my Discman isn't working because it shouldn't sound like this, right?" And I kept putting it up there. It's like, "Oh, it does sound like this." It took like 7 years, but yeah. But I mean, but even still, like it was, it was worth the uphill battle to get there. Like,
mm-hmm.
And it like you can just get. I mean, I get things now. I'm like, oh, I don't know what that word. I don't know what a word in Latin means. Let me go to Google Translate and I'll find it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's information is available to all of us. And that's kind of a cool thing, but kind of like maybe meant more when you had to work for it.
Yeah. Well, and one way I was, or one thing I was thinking as we're talking about this is, and I even think I mentioned again, I think I mentioned it to Jason too. Is just there. I feel like there's this really interesting experience that our people our age went through in terms of how metal evolved in the 90s. And I think it's just like, and I think it's like something, and not just metal obviously, but like music. Like, I look back and I listen to like grunge bands that I did, maybe at the time I was like, but I think about it like in terms of in gear, just in terms of like music gear. I'm like, there are so many interesting pedal choices and so many, like you brought up, you mentioned Helmet briefly earlier, like the way that Page from Helmet approached like guitar, like his chordal guitar solos in some of their songs. Like there is like a much more interesting, like kind of like devil may care, you can do whatever the fuck you want attitude, in the 90s. And I think that's what kind of gave way for a lot of what a lot of us do.
I think that metal entered into a dialogue with other musics in a more open way in the 90s than ever before. I feel like metal was sort of shielded off fortress before. It was one thing. It was like, this is metal and this is not. And in the 90s, there was so much interloping. And I remember when I got into metal, like my first issue of Metal Maniacs was like the year-end playlist or whatever. It was like the favorite year, the favorite records of the 90s or the 91. And it was people from like Napalm Death and whoever, and they were talking about like My Bloody Valentine and Smashing Pumpkins and all these other things, and they were in Cocteau Twins, and they were listening to all this other music, and all that eventually got absorbed. And then they went further back and got into fusion and got into, like we were talking about, 4AD and Dead Can Dance and all this other stuff. And in the 90s, that I guess sort of became permissible, and it gave way to all this other amazing stuff. And then American metal sort of, I guess Pantera became sort of the lingua franca of American metal. And like people like me, probably people like you, started to look to Europe for more interesting things, and those catatonia and dissection and all this other stuff, and they were absorbing all these other things too. And it's just, yeah, I mean, the 90s is just this potpourri of, I really don't think that all the potential that was inherent in the 90s has even been fully realized.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it really was. And it like all like, so two of the guys in Canvas, Chris and Gail, are 4 years younger than I am. And like they treat me like the old dude because I'm always talking about the 90s.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'll talk about an album, and Gail will be like, Hunter, let me guess, that was released in 1993. Like, as a matter of fact, it was, Gail. But like, I do. I mean, but I don't feel like this is just sort of empty nostalgia. I feel like there was a lot of value to the work that was being done in the 90s.
Yeah, there was. I mean, my experience was a little different only because I was a good Catholic boy growing up, and so I stayed away from those nasty satanic bands for a long time. Uh, so
Oh, I
honestly,
was a Southern Baptist, so
oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, so like it took a while for me to kind of come around to black metal and death metal. So like honestly for me, like thrash metal like was a big thing for me. I mean, obviously Metallica, Megadeth, etc. Um yeah, that's the other thing. Uh being able to say, oh, I was one of those Metallica fans that Metallica fans made fun of in 91 when I was like, I like Metallica, poser. um but 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 yeah, like, so for me, I actually ended up skewing the other direction where I was like really getting into like some of the power metal stuff that was coming out of, but again, coming out of Europe, because there were no American power metal bands in the 90s. And yeah, so it's but I
So, well,
can
yeah. So when did you? Yeah, because I wouldn't mind talking about this too. So,
okay.
yeah. So when did that happen for you? In terms of getting into more like melodic European stuff.
That was probably so well, I was always into, my friend got me into Iron Maiden, and
Okay.
that was kind of when Iron Maiden kind of became the be all end all for me, was
Hmm.
like 93, 94.
Okay.
Um and then I didn't even really know much about some of the other stuff. I mean, I trying to remember, but it was mainly when I went off to college, and like 97 is when that's when I first heard about Blind Guardian. And like, oh, and I always knew about Halloween too, obviously. Halloween was a
Yeah.
big one for me. But yeah, specifically I was just looking for like I fell in love with Blind Guardian, and still love those records. And that was kind of like my gateway to that. And then like learning about like uh Stradivarius and Gamma Ray and uh
Yeah.
Iron Savior. And granted, there weren't as many bands that I liked as much as I thought I was a huge power metal guy, but there's really not that many bands I was a huge fan of. Um,
There are very few.
uh, and then I found out that even like some of the bands that I really liked, other power metal fans hated. Like I remember, like, to this day, I still stand by those first few Rhapsody records. And yeah, I know that's a bold take. It's a bold take.
Yeah, I respect it, man. I respect that you're there.
um Narrator aside, those records were, I thought they put so much more effort into their power metal than most other bands. Cheesy, yes. The lyrics were terrible, yes. And yeah, terrible narrator with a lisp. Why you would do that, I don't understand it to this day. Like, just fucking hire somebody or don't have a narration. I don't know. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But like I really appreciate what they did from a musical standpoint. But yeah, that was all like, yeah, 97, 98 was like kind of like, getting into like the European stuff for that. And then it wasn't really until later that I kind of like started to finally get it took a while for me to get my ears accustomed to like harsh vocals. I mean, I think the first
Yeah.
band that really I was okay with harsh vocals was Fear Factory.
Okay.
Uh, but and still with some bands, it's I even think you guys mentioned it on the episode of the most recent episode where you were like doing the blind listens, and you're listening to that one band and you're like, this music is great, but these vocals suck.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Capafago. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think I had a hard time with that. It took a while for me to get an ear for that, but I guess, but as I was looking back on the 90s, I mean, like, you just think about, like, you know, like you said, Cynic, Atheist, you know, Morbid Angel, towards and I remember in the like the late 90s, I remember it was like Gorguts with Obscura.
Obscura. Yeah.
Another one took me a while to get into, but
I think that took everybody a while to get into.
but it was but like I look back on it, it's such a landmark record. And I remember that came out around the same time as
Huge, man. Huge.
like if they were touring with Nile, like, you listen to Nile's records.
Oh God, dude, I listened to Amongst the Catacombs not long ago, and I don't like any other Nile record, but I
Okay.
still like worship that record.
Okay.
It's an amazing record.
I'm a fan of Black Seeds of Vengeance. I love that one.
Black Seeds gets a little too into the kind of brutal death metal thing that I don't like.
Okay.
I still think Nephron Ka is like a classic death metal record.
Okay.
But it's funny, like, because so my entry point into metal was straight into death metal. Like
Really? Okay.
I didn't start listening to thrash until probably like the late 90s. So it was like all Earache, Century Media, and Roadrunner. And then in 94, I heard Gamma Ray for the first time. And I was like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And I got into Fate's Warning
Hmm.
and into Dream Theater's Images and Words that summer. And I had Images and Words like 2 years before that. And I thought it was like the schlockiest crap that I'd ever heard. I just did not understand it at all. Like I was listening to like Morbid Angel and Jesus Lizard. And it was like, dude, you've got a saxophone on the second song. I don't, what is this? What is that? And I looked at their picture and I was like, your sleeves are kind of puffy, and you're all wearing vests. Like the signifiers just didn't work for me. But yeah, like I mean, that was kind of it. And I was like, oh, it opened me up into a whole new dimension of metal.
Yeah.
And one that I still appreciate to this day, even though like there's precious little good power metal in my opinion, but the good stuff is as good as anything.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Like, there was this. Unfortunately, the guitar player passed away last year, but there's a local Massachusetts power metal band called Armory,
Hmm.
and they put out a record a few years, 2012. The name is escaping me, but I know it, and it's one of it. I would put it up there with any power metal record, like as one of the best power. And in the fact that they never did anything, they never got to
Yeah,
tour Europe or do any of that, is like criminal to me, because it was like one
yeah,
of the most perfect power metal records I've ever heard in my life.
yeah.
Um, and like I said, unfortunately, the guy passed away. But yeah, they were Empyrean Realms. That's the name of it. But
Okay.
but yeah, but I think also, I'm going all over the place. My brain is like jumping off things you were saying, and one thing that keeps coming back in my head is like, as a drummer, you'll probably have a take on this, but you mentioned Pantera, and I kind of almost I liked Pantera at the time when they came out, but
I'm still a fan of Cowboys.
oh yeah, I
Yeah, it's a great record.
I I love this stuff, but as as good of a drummer as Vinnie Paul was, as good of a guitar player as Dimebag Darrell was, I feel like they introduced a lot of bad habits into metal, into the sound of metal. Would you agree with that? Like
Absolutely, absolutely.
the kick
Yeah, I
drum
mean, they're,
sounds.
they're because when like at their simplest and their most accessible, they had essentially had the same appeal that punk probably did to someone in 1976 or 1977. It sort of democratized metal to people that well, I don't know how to say this without being an asshole, frankly.
Mhm. Okay.
But I mean, like it said, anybody can do it, and no,
Yeah.
like or even like Kurt Cobain.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, well, anybody can play guitar like that, but you can't necessarily write songs like that.
Yeah.
And through this kind of distillation, like you introduce people, and I don't know, man, like in the South, maybe I have a different perspective on things because like Pantera, like, dude, all the rednecks that like I grew up around, they fucking love Pantera. And they're like, man,
Yeah.
we'll kick some goddamn ass tonight. Well, listening to Walt. And it was like that, dude, like, I mean, it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, but like that ignores the fundamental truth that, as you say, Vinnie Paul and Dimebag were like truly awesome musicians.
Hmm.
Dude, St. Paul's an amazing drummer, like amazing. But like more people remember him for his strip club ownership and like his pyrotechnics than his drumming, and that's a shame.
It is.
But I mean, also in fairness, they kind of played into that.
Yeah. Well, besides that too, I mean, like I just think like I just think I just blame Pantera for why a lot of like those later 90s metal bands or like the popular ones had really shitty drum sounds and really shitty guitar sounds.
blame Terry Day.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. I shouldn't that's a good point. That and what was the name of the new metal producer?
Ross Robinson.
Yeah, I guess I could blame him too.
You should definitely blame him. You should blame him for a lot of things.
But yeah. Well, what's funny is going back to the power metal thing for a second. So in 98, I think, is when Helloween put out their Better Than
Raw,
which
fucking amazing album.
Thank you.
God, dude, amazing. That's one of their best albums.
It is. It's so good. And so I heard they were playing in New York City, and it was like their first time in the US in like 10 years or something like that. So I said, shit, I gotta go. And so I went, and it was at this tiny fucking club, because that's where those bands played,
Yeah, sure.
At that time. And it was at this tiny fucking club, and there was, and I'm sure you remember this too, in the 90s, that like late 90s, that there were no strict metal shows. There was a metal,
right.
There was a hardcore band. There was something else, somebody else opening. Like it just without
Bad
fail,
scene, man. Yeah.
Fail.
Yeah. Even in Atlanta, it would always be like this completely mixed bill, and inevitably, like a third of the audience would be pissed off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably saw Vision of Disorder like 5 times in like 1997 to 98 alone, just
sure.
with Anthrax. And anyway, point being, but anyway, so there was some shitty ass hardcore band opening for Helloween. That crowd was the meanest crowd I've ever seen, where they like the opening band stopped between their first song and their second song. They didn't stop for the rest of the set because that crowd just jumped on them. We're like, Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. And like they're trying to do their songs, and this dude holds up like a poster of Halloween in the front. It's like point to, it's like, this is who we want, not you fucks.
Damn.
I was like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, I didn't like them either, but like, come on. And like, they're all trying. They're just,
oh man,
that was crazy. The weirdest crowd, between that and like seeing like Manowar kids getting spin kicked by Earth Crisis fans at the Worcester Metal Fest in like 99. Like,
look, man, there's a song title in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I felt bad because it was like, because Manowar was headlining this one night, and so all the fans, these guys, got up front because they wanted to get up front for Manowar, but they had to sit through Earth Crisis, who was playing right before fucking Manowar. And wouldn't you know, like, all the Earth Crisis kids are fucking doing spin kicks and whatever, and these other, so like, I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah, now would have been a good night to wear your spikes, guys.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with any of these stories, but it's just like two dudes reminiscing about the 90s, basically.
Yeah, man. I'm always happy to do
that. Anyway, well, okay, so let me get back to like a more general question, or not general, more. Tell me about Plague Psalms, because that I really like too. You mentioned it in the email, and I went and I listened to it. I loved that.
Dude, thank you so much,
I
man.
love that.
That means a lot. So Plague Song kind of began as my idea as this solo project and quickly like evolved into something else. Like, I knew I wanted to be percussion based, and dark, and there's a lot of stuff that I like outside of metal, like Cold Meat Industry stuff and early Swans and that kind of thing. And I wanted to have a vehicle for that. And initially, I asked Nathan to help me out, and he did. And then eventually, Gail, who's the bass player in Canvas, and also, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this later, but Gail has a band that we're all a part of that is amazing. Gail wrote this incredible album that we're hoping to release later this year, but it's another thing.
Okay.
But anyway, like, yeah, Gail came on and we just kind of finished the record. And I had a really, like a lot of people, had a very tough 2020. And it almost ended my life.
Oh,
And I mean, genuinely, I wound up in the hospital like near dead in 2020. And
oh,
when I got away from that and got better, I was like, you know what? I've got to make the most of my time. And I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. And Plague Song was the way to do it. And so my buddy Justin Pravat recorded all the percussion, and then Nate and Gail got involved, and we wrote it together, and kind of became this thing. And actually, there's a second record that's already done, but
oh,
we
good.
hadn't mixed it yet, and we're gonna wait a little bit. But Jason Walton, yeah, Jason, fuck you, Walton, you know, son of a bitch, also liked it, and he was like, man, let me put it out. And so we did. We put it out on his Earth and Sound record,
Oh, cool.
did a cassette pressing, and yeah. But I do thank you so much, man. It means a lot to me.
Uh,
So it's music very close to me, and yeah, it's something that I'm hoping to do for a while.
oh, cool, cool. Yeah, yeah. I saw it was a cassette release, and I'm like, because I put out a dungeon synth record last year on
Oh,
cassette too,
nice.
and like, yeah, like I feel like,
What's it called?
oh, Daliad. I'll send you the link afterwards.
Dude, I'm a fan of the genre. And
Oh,
Nathan's
okay.
a huge Dungeon Synth fan, man. So
Okay,
yeah,
cool. All right, I'll
yeah,
say,
sweet. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because that was my pandemic, was doing synth and other stuff, projects, but yeah, but Blimpie, I was like, a lot of people would probably think, because I think a lot of people in like the early 2000s, yeah, especially like, yeah, bands that were doing stuff in like early 2000s were like, it was such a novelty and such a thing to get something pressed on vinyl, and
Mhm.
vinyl became kind of a big deal for bands. I mean, that's where we made a lot of money uh touring with, but
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure.
but um but now that vinyl is pretty much so hard to get, because now the fucking major labels ruined everything. Now I feel like everybody's doing the cassette thing, and
Dude, I mean, we wanted to, and we looked into doing vinyl, and it was prohibitive, man. Like,
it's,
not only the time, but like, I'm like, dude, we couldn't afford this
yeah.
if our lives depended on it. Yeah.
You're like, should I take out a second mortgage on my house?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna squeeze every ounce of equity that I have in my house to do a vinyl pressing of an album that probably no one will buy.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter doesn't need to go to college.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, who gives a shit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but but I think, like, going back to growing up, I'm like, I'm actually cool with putting out stuff on cassette, just because, like, um although
Dude,
cassette
that's how
playing,
I learned to listen to music in a
yeah,
patient way. You know, like I
yeah,
learned to listen to an entire album on cassette. So I have no problem doing that.
yeah. Um, yeah. So I think that's just kind of the way to go for most of us now. Although I can't find a good tape player. I mean, unless I get like an old school, like modern tape players just sound like
Dude,
ass.
mine's pretty shitty. I to be honest with you, I don't even know what I have. I bought one because a plague song, and then I just started buying things that I'd given away on cassette, like the corporate death comp and all these old like death metal, but like, dude, my tape player is pure ass.
Okay.
No, dude, they are. I think you got to go, but even that, like now, that's expensive.
Yeah. Well,
Like, yeah,
well, I wonder if my thought is, are the modern cassette players built to sound like shit, or did they always sound like shit? And then we got so used to listening to good quality music that we're going back and and realizing how bad we had it. That's the only other thing I
you
could
know,
think of.
you know what, dude? Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Let's say that we got, we got a condition to the fidelity of a compact disc, and it was always this bad. That
Yeah.
makes me feel better about,
Yeah.
dude. Like, I don't even know if I have a ground problem or if my cassette player sounds that bad, but like, I'll start a cassette just like, and then,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's kind of dispiriting, frankly.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one
No,
having that
you're not, man. You're not.
um where did I have did I bring that? No, I did not. So I had a notebook because uh I wanted to kind of ask you these same questions I asked Jeff during his podcast because I want to get your side of things.
Okay.
Uh
I feel
my
like I'm on
the Newlywed Game.
yeah, yeah.
Or yeah, I know.
I think it's the Newlywed Game. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But and I haven't actually listened back to Jeff's interview. I have to edit it because I'm putting it out this week, but I haven't listened back to
Okay.
it, so I forget
All
what
right.
I forget what his answer was. So
Yeah, awesome. I'm
for the
looking
most
forward
part,
to this.
so I was just curious, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be, and why would it be Norway?
God.
Yeah.
It would be Tromso, actually, because I would be above the Arctic Circle. It would be nighttime most of the time. I find the sun incredibly offensive. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and I'm from South Georgia, and it is a hostile and arrogant star that doesn't deserve all of its credit. But you get the Gulf Stream, so it's not all that cold. I mean, it's cold, but not harshly cold.
Yeah,
Um, and also I would be in Norway,
yeah.
dude. I mean, our fetishism of Norway has entered into like questionable moral territory at this point, and it's only gotten worse. It started there, and then it's just like intensified over time. But it would be Norway. And all right, let me try to balance that out somehow. If it weren't Norway, it would probably be the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, that makes sense.
I visited there. I spent enough time there. My dad lived there for a while, and I find a kinship with that place.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Pacific Northwest as well.
yeah.
Uh,
I love that question. And why would it be Norway?
well, yeah, I think that popped Jeff too because I was just like, because really it was just a way for me to talk about how you guys have a fetish for Norway. That was really that's the main point of that question.
Yeah, we do. Gail was born and raised in Paris, and lived in Paris until he was 16, and then his dad took a job in Columbus, Georgia, which um, is this
Not
complete bullshit place on the border of Alabama. It, like, even to like a Georgian, it is just an abominable place. Um, and so he still has a lot of bitterness about that. But I'm also a Francophile, just culturally.
yeah.
And yeah, so I constantly bother Gail about French things. So but see, like, given one choice, yeah, Norway. So
Okay.
yeah.
And then the other thing I'm curious about is in all of the discussions you've had over the years, can you think of one band you both you you disagreed about? or
Seaweed.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't. Do you mean on radical research or just in general?
In general.
Seaweed.
Okay.
I am a uh, just devoted fan of their album Span Away. And I have evangelized to Jeff about this album for ages. And I even went so far as to buy him a copy because I was so convinced that at some point he would be persuaded to its greatness. And he and I he spent Christmas with me in 2013 after he Jeff and I have this very odd sort of parallel relationship. And it seems like when one of us is going through a hard time, we're both going through a hard time. And
Okay.
we both were at this time. And we decided to spend Christmas at my parents' place in 2013. And my parents were, my dad passed away years ago, but like he and Jeff and my parents were like very, very close. And anyway, we spent Christmas there and we had this kind of tender moment together. And he goes, Hunter, I have to tell you, I just don't like seaweed. Damn it, man. Damn it. There are probably other things. Memento Mori. I've never been able to get him into Memento Mori's first record,
Oh,
Rhymes of Lunacy.
I I don't know it. I know who they are. That's Mike Weed's band, right?
Mike Weed and yeah, Messiah Markolin, Snowy Shaw.
That's right. Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
fuck it. I love Messiah Marklin. I really like that. I don't know. We'll see.
But anyway, but mostly, yeah. Seaweed's the thing that I've tried to get him into over the years. It's just never worked out, man. So
That's okay. I mean, it's funny like hearing people talk about like these. Again, Jason talked about it too, like just like this experience of bringing music to people and how awesome it is. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great feeling. It never worked when I brought music to somebody. Like for the longest time, like people just assumed I always had the worst taste in music. So like no one ever like took anything I said seriously. And I'm like, no, really.
dude, it took me years and years to find people that were even vaguely receptive to my opinions.
Yes.
So now I understand. I mean, it was like really, it was probably into my 20s before anyone like took me seriously, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, and Jeff and I had sort of went into this, evangelism kind of blindly, like maybe no one will care, but if two people buy a record that we love, that's enough.
Yeah. That's true.
I mean, it doesn't really cost us much to do this. And like, if someone's listening and we turn someone on to a record that like, not even, I mean, it changes their life, but like does something good for them,
Yeah.
makes them happy.
Yeah.
Man, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this next question I didn't get a chance to ask Jeff, and I figured but I figured you would probably have an opinion on this too. Um, who's the biggest bass whore, Joey Vera or Charlie D'Angelo.
Oh God, Charlie D'Angelo. Oh God, no, Charlie D'Angelo is like just syphilitic bass whore. Oh my God, dude, no one has whored so much on basses as Charlie did. Dude, like Charlie D'Angelo has been a punchline in my life for like 20 some odd years, man.
Yes.
I mean, Joey Vera, like, I mean, sure, yeah, he spread himself around, but God damn, dude, Charlie D'Angelo, like, come on, dude. There's literally nothing that you couldn't pay Charlie D'Angelo to play on, and he would.
Well,
I mean, and you know, with all due respect, he's played on some records that I like.
yeah.
But I mean, having said that,
I think there was like in some magazine in like 99, there's like an Onion like article, and it was like scientists found a way to clone Charlie D'Angelo and so that he could play in all of the bands at once.
dude, it's unreal, man.
Yeah,
It's
just
unreal.
Like,
He's like the like
get
the
away from
Vinny
him.
Colaiuta of like metal bass playing, man.
You couldn't get away from him. He's like, he's in Merciful Fate. He's with King Diamond. He's in Witchery. He's in Arch Enemy. He's in. It's just like, where the?
I know, man. Like, how do you find the time? Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. Dear God. This has been a joy to talk to you. I love talking about bullshit like this.
Me too, man. Obviously.
So I don't really have any other questions off the top of my head, but so to get back to your music for a second, so you are tentatively working on new Canvas Solaris?
Yeah, probably a little ways out. Like Chromosphere, like doing a full record anymore is a lot. We're all spread out now. Gail has a very demanding job. Gail's like like kind of an important person, frankly. Like I like thinking that like Gail's one of my best friends. I'm like, why? I feel unworthy of being Gail's friend, but like we're all spread out. We all obligations, families, that sort of thing. So like doing a full album anymore just kind of seems like too much. So right now we have 4 big songs. It's probably about like, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes worth of material. We're going to do 2 EPs. We're thankfully kind of self-sufficient at this point.
Yeah.
Chris and Gail and Nate all have the ability to record. Chris is a great drum engineer. He did all my drums for the sculptured record. So we can kind of do everything on our own and our own pace. So that's kind of what we're working on now. Gail's project, Gorging Shade, is and I'll send you some stuff later.
Okay.
It's kind of experimental. I hate to say Black Death because of like, I don't know. I think about all the nondescript Black Death I don't know. I feel like I'm talking about something on Necropolis in like 2001 or something, but like it's really, really cool. And that's like kind of the closest thing to being done. We got another Plague Psalm in the can that we're
Right.
gonna mix, and then yeah, a couple of new Canvas EPs. So
cool. And you said it a couple times, but yeah, you are the drummer and sculptured now. And
I am like saying that, like I can't even, like when I say that, it's hard to believe. Like it's super humbling. I've been a fan like since the first album, and like I couldn't have more respect for Don and Jason, and super stoked to work with Marius too. Like it's got, and dude, the album is killer.
Okay, cool.
It's really, really cool, man. Like, yeah, Don's compositions are amazing. So I'm really, really pumped about that.
Cool.
So
Awesome.
yeah, like I'm probably busier musically than I've been in a long time. And actually, if I can plug something else,
Sure, go ahead,
I
Ed.
hate, I hate, I don't know, this makes me feel very self-conscious, but I actually have a kind of music journal coming out in the next month or two.
Oh, I think I
Oh,
think I saw
Deserts
you
of
mention.
Hex, yeah,
Yes.
that my friend Thomas Clark and I are doing together. He goes by the handle of Vortice Mortale on Instagram, and my really good friend, he's kind of a lifelong friend, Ryan Madsen, contributed to it. He's doing the layout, and then Forrest Pitts, Fallow Heart, he writes for Decibel and some other
Hmm.
things. He contributed. So yeah, that'll probably be out in the next month or two, and yeah, really pumped about that.
And what is that in regards to? Just talking
It's
about
yeah,
music?
it's basically like a very essay. It's graphically sparse, like just long essays about music.
Okay.
There's going to be one like Thomas and I co-wrote uh, Devil Doll piece on the entire discography, and including some of the I don't know, man, some of the mythology behind Mr. Doctor, and
That's awesome.
I did a piece on French rock and metal between the late '70s and the 2010s, and yeah, it's gonna be yeah, it's probably of niche interest, but I
No,
imagine
that's cool.
that yeah, for the people that are into that kind of thing, it'll be worthwhile, and I'm really stoked about it.
That's awesome. But yeah, seriously, Hunter, thank you. This flew by and this was a lot of fun, man.
Dude, thank you so much. This was a joy,
I
man.
think I figured you guys would get like I always enjoy talking to Jeff, and I could tell just from the radical research. I'm like, I'll have a easy time talking with Hunter too. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. This is great.